So, welcome everybody to the very first of our general election special podcast.
Yes.
And what a day to kick off with.
Well, we were agog all day because Nigel Farage, for it was he, had tweeted on X that he was going to make an emergency announcement. There was lots of speculation about whether it was going to be a deal with the Tories or what.
Yeah.
And then he marches on stage after Richard Tice, the incumbent leader of the
Warm-up Act,
the Reform Party, had said that he was delighted to be handing over the leadership of the party.
He didn't look delighted.
He didn't look delighted at all. To Farage, who talked about his duty to the nation and the revolt, the uprising out there that he detected when he'd been out campaigning, and that he changed his mind.
Yeah.
And he was going to stand in Clacton as the Reform Party's candidate. They already had a candidate there, but he has ceased to be.
That was news to him as well, I guess.
It was news to him as it was to the country.
And he's got to overturn a massive majority.
He does. It's about 24,000. The incumbent is a Tory of the right called Giles Watling. But Clacton is pretty much the most fertile terrain a Reform stroke Brexit stroke UKIP politician like Farage with his huge profile could ask for. Very Brexity. It's not a lock. You never know what's going to happen. But he has a very strong chance of winning.
And Tice is standing in Skegness, isn't he? Which is also massively Brexity.
Very winnable. And I think it's a fascinating... First of all, I mean, it's a fascinating development in what threatened to be a very beige campaign.
Yeah.
Because, Farage, for people like us at the New European, is as ghastly as it gets, but he is also, one has to concede, much more charismatic than any of the other party leaders.
I mean, we were taught, let's be absolutely clear, and for the record, we both abhor
everything he stands for.
But it would be a massive mistake to think he's anything other than a consummate communicator. He absolutely hits his audience on the head.
And strategist. So what was interesting was that, and we wrote about this in the New European last year, was that he was at the Conservative Party conference and very present and much hailed, and acclaim went his way. And he made it very clear, he said as much, that he was tempted by rejoining the Conservative Party and obviously had half an eye on the leadership. And we speculated, my God, that's possible. And if that's possible, is it possible he could become Prime Minister? What's interesting, I think, and I suspect played as much of a part in his decision as his alleged feeling of his debt to society and the nation, right, was that he has concluded on the basis of the polls, which is by no means wrong, that the Conservatives are headed for a cataclysm.
Yes.
The
scale of it is growing in its fantastic nature, isn't it?
So a big YouGov poll came out today on the basis of which some of the big Tory scalps that would go, Jeremy Hunt, Penny Mordaunt, Grant Shapps, Mel Stride, Labour would have a 194-seat majority. And that actually is, that leaves the Tories with 140 seats, but there have been polls that have left them with less than 100 seats.
There have been polls that suggest that they won't even be the opposition.
Exactly.
That the Liberal Democrats will be the opposition.
So
but Reform does change that dynamic, doesn't it?
It does. And I think that it's interesting in the Sunday Times and before, he's always been obsessed by the 1993 Canadian election. Now, this sounds incredibly arcane, but it isn't, because the point about that election was that the main right-wing party, the Progressive Conservatives, had a complete meltdown, and they filled 2 seats. And Reform, Canadian Reform, which is what
inspired his naming of this
party, replaced it as the party of the right.
Yeah.
And it never became more than the opposition, but it was a dynamite moment, because at that point, this is a long time ago now, people weren't used to parties suddenly ceasing to exist. We've become more used to volatility now, but at the end of last year, he was still thinking, I might take over the Conservative Party. I think what he's now thinking is, if I can win this seat, I'll lead the Reform Party. He says he'll lead it for the whole Parliament, which means he
5
has
years,
5 years. And in the course of that, I can realign the right to my benefit.
Yeah. So it's just more awful news for Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party. But let's just assume that it's a done thing, that he loses, Sunak disappears off into the sunset. What is absolutely fascinating now is what becomes of the Tory party.
It is
post this election. I mean, as it's quite possible, as you've just said, they completely splinter and disintegrate.
Absolutely.
It's possible that we get sort of two wings, isn't it? Like a sort of pro-European, one nation Tory party, and then a hardcore reform party.
I think the if there is a pro-European one nation wing, it will be,
two people
in a phone box.
Yeah.
I think that it will present, if Farage does win, and this is a big if, his seat, it will present the new Tory party that emerges from the ashes, whatever that is, with a tremendous problem, because whatever they say on a sort of populist nationalist basis, which is the direction travel the party is taking, he will outbid them.
Yeah,
because he said some at this event today. He said some very Islamophobic things.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. Within 3 minutes of saying he's standing, he's invoking the phrase Allah Akbar and all of this, and all of the dog whistles.
And his language on Islam actually has been getting more and more openly hostile.
Yeah, I mean, brazen in his hostility.
It really isn't the sort of we have nothing against Islam, but we deplore the extreme wing. It really isn't that. No. It's I don't like Islam. It's
just this. It's this great replacement theory.
It really is. Which I suppose we should explain to listeners is this idea that people of white ethnicity are being slowly replaced by people of colour, but particularly people of colour who have values that are not consistent in the view of the far right with Judeo-Christian values, i.e. Muslims.
He said a very interesting thing in an interview last week, I think it was, on TV. Was it Question Time, where somebody said that the problem is that you see Muslims as other, and he said no, the problem is they see us as other, and he said no other culture has tried to come into a community and insisted that we adopt their ways. I mean, this is nothing but absolute propaganda and nonsense.
What he does is he goes further than you think anyone would go.
Yeah.
I think Dave Chappelle said of Trump, he's an honest liar, and there's something in that. There's Farage is an authentic bastard. He really is. Yeah. He was willing today to say, "Yep, I changed my mind."
Yeah.
The journalist kept saying, "You said this."
Yeah.
And now you're doing this. He said, well, so what? Yeah. Have you never changed your mind?
Yeah.
They said, well, it's a bit hard on the candidate who was there, and he said, well, politics is a tough game.
Yeah.
Who made who was it, you and or Richard, who made this decision? And he smirked as if to say, visually, obviously it was my decision, and then said, well, I think we kind of talked about it.
And again, it's worth underscoring just how brilliant he is at turning those potentially hurdles into positives for himself.
Absolutely.
I mean, just one woman asked him, why didn't you announce this in Clacton and you announced it in London? Does this show disregard for your future constituents? Yeah. And he said, I announced it here because you lot are too bloody lazy to go to Clacton.
That's right.
And you're all here. So he is so adept at spinning stuff around and you've got to put yourself into the mindset of not us, not the political commentators, the Westminsterati, but the people who are sitting there wondering who to vote for. And you would find yourself nodding along to that because he's got a pat answer for everything.
The other thing that I think will have influenced him is how deadly dull Keir Starmer versus Rishi Sunak has been.
Yeah.
I mean, it's which variety of beige would you like?
Yeah. And he's right, because people cannot distinguish.
And I mean, really what you've been seeing, to a depressing extent, is a battle between two forms of conservatism. So Sunak has desperately been trying to keep hold of the core vote and fend off the reform attack with silly policies on national service, which fall apart immediately, obviously done on the back of a fag packet, offers to pensioners, sort of pork barrel politics with offers to towns that are in Tory constituencies, and so on. Meanwhile, Starmer, look, it's understandable that in his shoes, he operates a reassurance strategy. But there's a difference in a reassurance strategy and Tory cosplay.
I'm reminded of the quote from Bob Hoskins to the US Mafia in The Long Good Friday, where he says, I've heard of sleeping partners, but you lot are in a bloody coma.
I mean, if only, I'd love Bob Hoskins still to be alive to deliver that speech.
But we've been saying on this podcast since we started it that we get it. We get the strategic notebook. But what Britain needs is a mission.
You can't have a change, the one word as your slogan, and not offer anything.
Yeah.
So what you've got at the moment is no national insurance or income tax rises, or Jeremy Hunt says the Tories are not going to raise VAT. Within hours, Labour said, neither are we.
Yeah.
They've ruled out wealth taxes, which is, we've said repeatedly on the podcast, is a major and unnecessary mistake.
Yeah.
But reading Keir Starmer in The Sun on Sunday, first of all, using the formulation "read my lips," which always leads to trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, it is always a bad thing to say. Read my lips, I'll lower immigration or something, and talking about sky-high migration.
Yeah.
And then Yvette Cooper's, the Shadow Home Secretary, is on Laura Kuenssberg's show on the BBC, and she declines to rule out outsourcing asylum seekers to foreign countries. Now, we know they're going to drop the Rwanda scheme, and that's good.
Yeah.
But she said, what's the effect of what counts as what works?
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, what exactly is it that makes this Labour Party a Labour Party?
He seems scared to... I remember Piers Morgan found himself on a flight with Rishi Sunak to the States, of course, to LA, of course.
Of course.
To Rishi's future pad. And Piers Morgan said that he had said to Rishi Sunak, you need to be a bit like England cricket. You need to play some shots. You need to adopt Bazball. You need to go for something. And obviously Sunak hasn't got that within him, but that's exactly the right advice for Labour. They need to play some shots. They need to be saying, this is what we're about. Presenting yourself constantly as just the negative to somebody else's negative. It doesn't play in politics.
But I mean, they are more or less shadowing Conservative policy at the moment.
Yeah.
Which is a disastrous strategy, I think. I mean, they are lucky in that the Conservative Party is now so exhausted and useless that I'm sure they're going to win, and I suspect quite heftily. But it's a dispiriting prospect because, you want, when you're facing the prospect of a new government coming in after 14 years of the other party, you want something a bit more than, well, they're not as rubbish as this lot.
Yeah. And you know where Farage is going to strike really hard is on Brexit. Because, Starmer has said, and if I hear a Labour frontbencher saying this one more time, the telly goes out the window. Starmer said, we'll make Brexit work. Right?
Yeah.
Farage will say, you can't make Brexit work. You've had all the time in the world. You backed the Tories in the Brexit we've got now. It doesn't work. You haven't got the guts for it. And I know what the people want, and they've been betrayed. That's what he will say. Well, and there'll be a lot of people nodding along to that.
He's a authentic populist.
Yeah.
Populists always talk about betrayal and blame. Now, Sunak, when he came in, thought, because he's a technocrat, Brexit isn't working because I haven't been Prime Minister and I'm a genius. So I bring in the Windsor framework with Ursula von der Leyen, and that will sort everything out. And of course, what he doesn't understand is that Brexit is and will always be a rubbish idea.
Yeah.
What Farage understands is that the route to power is, first of all, to get Brexit over the line, which he did in 2016, and then to use Brexit as a stick with which to beat the establishment and say, you're failing the people, you're not doing what they asked you to do in 2016, what they voted for, the will of the people, you are enemies of the people, it drained the swamp. I mean, all of the tactics we've become used to with Trump. And I think that, again, we look at the sort of, another variety of MAGA UK here. The difference being that, Farage looks to me like someone who has really got the bit between his teeth. To an alarming extent.
Yeah.
He is a consequential politician. He has changed the rules of the game. And it's interesting how, if you look back at what he's been doing, what has he been doing? He's been broadcasting.
Yeah, honing those skills.
He's been honing those skills. He's been doing a show, on GB News, and we all mock it, and, rightly so. But
LBC before that.
He got sacked from it.
Let's not forget that they all platformed him as well.
They all platformed him. He's always on Question Time.
Yeah.
He is now a very seasoned broadcaster in a way that neither Starmer or Sunak could remotely claim to be. I mean, think back to how bad Sunak was in the leadership debates in 2022, sort of gurning and impatient. And we know in interviews, as we've said it before, he is the tetchiest of the tetchy.
Yeah.
Now, Starmer is also sort of very reserved, and that's his brand. Farage is brilliant at just turning every attack into, I'm glad you asked me that.
Yeah. And because he's got a natural wit. And neither Starmer nor Sunak, maybe they do in private, but they do their damnedest to hide it if they do. And there was a piece of advice from somebody talking. In fact, I think it was Tom Baldwin was talking about how to play the elections, the TV debates.
Yes.
And he said, only people with a natural wit can be witty. You cannot be witty. Don't try to be witty.
You can't pretend
to be funny. You can't fake that. But Farage can do that, and that plays so well with people.
It does. Well, I mean, it took, and I still think a lot of people, a lot of progressives don't understand how good Donald Trump is at reaching out and making people feel seen.
Yeah.
The fact that he's deplorable and now a convicted felon, is still there, but it does not seem to have impacted, at least so far, the fact that a huge proportion, hundreds of millions of Americans regard him as a better prospect than Joe Biden to be the winner in the presidential election in November.
As your great piece in this week's New European spells out very eloquently, it's very hard for us to understand what is going on over there, but you better believe it, because it's happening.
Yes. And there was another point that, because we're not that far away from the European elections, that Farage made about younger voters. Now, I don't think most younger voters are nationalist or indeed racist, but if you look across Europe, there is a rise of the far right amongst under 30s, and there is a danger of that in this country, because Farage is exactly the sort of, he made the point. I think Tice made the point in the press conference that, on Facebook, Reform is winning this campaign. That they are getting more hits.
Yeah.
And that understanding of social media, that understanding of independent media, that understanding of how to reach through the screen to speak to people's sort of emotions and give them narratives that they can cling on to. And there's something deeply and it's almost scandalously manipulative about it, because Farage doesn't actually offer any hope or solutions to anyone about anything.
No. He cited, all his new constituents. He said, many of them be sole traders, many of them, they'll be plumbers, or they'll run a taxi firm or whatever. He's done nothing but damage to all of those people through Brexit. There's nobody in this country who's benefited from the policy he almost single-handedly drove home for decades.
Yeah, I mean,
nobody. We've all lost.
With Trumpian ease, he claimed that the UK is now, what was it,
fourth now.
In the,
he said now we're fourth of
what?
Exporters of something. Some
where did that come
nonsense.
from?
Yeah,
where did that nonsense come from? But he's able to say it with a straight face.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say he's immune to fact checking.
Yeah.
But people don't come to Farage for facts. They come to him to have their feelings validated.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly dangerous, as we've seen in America and other countries.
All right, so we've listed out and we've given some time to his positives, because it's really important to understand how he operates and why he is effective. But let's go for a very quick break and then come back and have a think about how do you combat a man like Nigel Farage?
Will do.
So, Matt, how do you combat a man like Nigel Farage?
Well, what you don't do is replay the 2016 referendum and hurl facts at him.
Right.
You know, there's a sort of assumption among some people who read the FT and newspapers of its ilk that if you throw an Excel spreadsheet at a populist, they'll kind of crumple. This is not the case. And I think we've tested that theory to destruction.
Yeah.
What is desperately needed now, at this point in kind of history, is a form of progressive narrative that is not just rubbish like the nationalist one. It's underpinned by evidence-based policy, proper ideas, proper solutions, radical solutions to 21st century problems, but has on top of it, and this is really nothing new, in fact. You know, I mean, Kennedy, Martin Luther King. You know, it's not as if the idea of compelling progressive narratives is a sort of innovation, but it's got lost in a kind of technocratic stew and an assumption that all you have to do is just reassure people that you're not too left wing, and then leave them to it.
And so you're a bit more centrist and you're a lot more competent, and that's enough.
Exactly.
Well, it might not be enough.
So, you know, Starmer's constant line is, I have changed the Labour Party.
Yeah.
You know, which is true.
Yeah.
You know, I have taken it from its worst defeat since 1935 to the verge of office, which is true.
And should be marked as a remarkable achievement.
It's a historic achievement.
Yeah.
But the one bit that's lacking in the Starmer armoury, and it may be that he just can't do it, you know, to your point in the first half of the podcast about what Tom Baldwin said, it may be that he is personally not capable of doing narrative emotion. You know, he's a lawyer, he's a forensic politician, he's quite reserved, I think, certainly as a politician. I don't know about in private life, but, you know, he doesn't have that facility. And I think when you watch him at the dispatch box, you can see that he is and will always be a barrister.
Yeah.
You know, he believes, and it's a good thing to believe in, he believes in the power of forensic argument and empiricism. But unfortunately, in contemporary politics, it's not enough. And it's certainly not enough when you're up against right-wing populists of the caliber of Farage. Now, you know, the good news is that Labour is almost certainly going to win the election quite heftily. And Farage, the best that will happen for Farage is that he wins and a couple of other people do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if...
And you might get as our political editor James Ball was saying on our little internal WhatsApp group,
yes,
you might get 5 or 10 defections after the election.
I think that's...
But again, so what, you know?
I think that's quite a plausible scenario, actually.
So you might end up with 10, 15 MPs, you know.
But I think that therein lies the problem, which is that after the election, the story will be Starmer. The story will be Labour. The story will be the new government, how it works, what happens to the Tory party. But Farage, if he gets the seat, if he wins Clacton, will have this sort of quiet gravitational power, which is, as you say, all these dejected, fed up right-wing Tory MPs following the path taken by 30p Lee, you know, jumping over to reform. And suddenly and slowly, you know, it builds up.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I was struck by the fact that he talked about a 5-year game plan, and although he obviously does want to be prime minister and king of the world and everything, he also said, and then maybe it'd be time to turn over to someone younger. In other words, there's a real strategy here to realign the right. He wants to be remembered. He's obviously got huge narcissistic, megalomaniacal legacy plans.
Yeah.
He wants to have been responsible for Brexit, and then he wants to be responsible for realigning the right away from traditional conservatism towards populist, nativist, what we would call racist, right-wingery.
Yeah.
And that's a big job. I mean, let's not underestimate it.
I don't think I've got no doubt that he nods off at night dreaming of being Prime Minister. I'm sure of that. I mean, again, the craft of the guy, when asked about it directly at the press conference, and what is it, like, as we're recording this a couple of hours ago?
Yeah.
He said he didn't deny it. Every other politician on the planet would have said, no, come on, blah, blah, blah. He said, who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Do.
Maybe 2029, maybe, who knows? So that is an indication, and people should take it so seriously of how he sees his personal destiny.
I think to circle back to your original question, Matt, the hardest thing to do in politics is to see the world through the eyes of people who disagree with you fundamentally.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us can do it wholly.
Yeah.
But the impulse of progressives, and I laugh at him. You think he's a ridiculous person, sort of like Ken Clark.
Same way we laughed at Boris Johnson.
Right.
Yeah.
Ken Clark's naughty Eurosceptic nephew, sort of what an idiot, sort of smoking and drinking and making an idiot of himself.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that's the danger point, which is take him deadly seriously. When he says something, even if he says it apparently in a jocular manner, look at it in transcribed and take it literally. Take it literally.
Yeah.
And this I think is the challenge for if people want to see the Tory party return to something like centrism. If Starmer wants to keep reform at bay, they have to take him more seriously than they're inclined to. And that's hard because we live in such a polarized, divided political culture now that actually seeing the world through the eyes of someone you might hate is very, very hard.
And you have to see, my inclination is that you have to fight fire with fire with somebody like Nigel Farage. There's no point trying to stamp down the flames on the edges and sort of just contain it. You can't contain it. You have to do battle with it.
I 100% agree.
This is where this policy of containment, because I think it is a policy of containment that Keir Starmer's perpetrating, and it's not going to be enough for people. People need to see, look, I sort of get what Farage is saying, and I do agree, but make Farage look like the past, not the future. Make him look like the guy who brought 2016 upon us and wrecked this country. Don't make him look like he's the bloody future.
Get personal. Blame him. Use his own weapons against him. It's interesting actually because it takes me back a bit. When I was a columnist at The Guardian, way back in 2017, New Year 2017, and progressives were in a very, very depressed state after Brexit and Trump, and I wrote a piece based on that brilliant scene in The Untouchables, where your doppelganger Sean Connery tells Kevin Costner as Elliot Ness that if he wants to beat Capone, he's going to have to use Chicago rules, right? And I said, look,
if he brings your gun to a fight, if he brings your knife to a fight, you bring a gun.
If which one of yours in the hospital, you put one of his in the morgue. That's the Chicago way. Now, and I said, you've got metaphorically, you've got to adopt this. If you want to beat this movement, you can't just say, but surely they understand that being nice is better.
Yeah.
You have to go out there and destroy them.
That's right.
And I have to say that the comments below the line were not happy. They were, "But this is horrible,"
From The Guardian?
Yeah. I mean, they didn't want to hear that because the notion of being on the right side of history is so strong on the left that the idea that you're going to have to beat people in order to get what you want, the idea that in the end, everything, there is no sort of direction to history. There's just human agency in what you do with it. It's very unpopular on the left. And I think at the moment, there are more there are too many people on the left who think, in the end, the false consciousness idea. In the end, the public will just wake up to the fact that populist right wingers are nasty.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work like that.
I've never seen that happen, have you?
It's
never happened. And it does illustrate also a problem with media as well.
Yes.
In that the people in the Daily Mail newsroom will be cock-a-hoop today because they've got their hero back.
The hero back.
There's 5 years worth of front page splashes for them about what Nigel says, about what Nigel does, about how Britain has gone soft and has gone hell in a handcart, as Paul Dacre's favourite phrase. Well, the left-wing media have been pathetic in the face of that kind of right-wing bullshit. The Guardian, the Mirror, like you say, everybody tiptoes around this thing because they don't want to be seen to be aggressive and pointed, which is why we, the New European, although it's full of, I think, high quality long form journalism, but on our front covers we really do try to hammer home, hopefully with humour sometimes, but an aggressive point about the opposition.
And this is, in historical terms, this is new because the progressive side of the tracks has always been capable in Britain of using scorn and satire, and saying you're ridiculous, and we need more of that, and we also need less condescension and more attack. They're not the same thing.
No, that's right.
They're absolutely not the same thing.
That's right. And there's a confusion over partisanship as well. You can be honestly partisan.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you want evidence of that, go and look at the Spectator, go and look at the Daily Mail, go and look at the Sun. They are. Well, I think some of those are dishonestly partisan. But you can say, take the Spectator. There's a magazine filled with people who believe what they're saying and they say it with as much gusto as they can.
It is a very, I would say Fraser Nelson is one of the most honest editors in our trade.
Yeah.
Because, he is absolutely, fairly socially liberal, economically very, very dry.
Yeah.
That's what he stands for.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it's not, politics is not the New European versus the Spectator, is it?
No.
It's what we're talking about is Nigel Farage, who is a missile of bad intent against people who don't recognise that they're the target,
Well, one sort of sub-note to that was that although I think Starmer probably was the inevitable winner of the 2020 leadership contest, I went to a lot of the hustings, and the winner of everyone I attended by far, in the respects we're talking about, was Lisa Nandy.
Right.
But the party didn't want her because, and there's a certain, I think there is a certain pro-man element in certainly in the unions and in the Labour membership, but also because, her ideas aren't necessarily as formulated, although they have become since. But actually, she's an example of a politician, as is Jess Phillips, who really has been sidelined, of politicians on the left who can reach out. They speak to people, but they're not at front and centre.
No,
they're not.
And Angela Rayne
who definitely has that talent, has been
almost put into a box, hasn't, like the token kind of, not much we can do about it.
And there is a kind of, when because the Mail and Mail on Sunday come after her consistently, constantly, all the time. Yeah. And,
like stalkers.
And the leadership, you can see, wait.
Yeah.
Just to see how it's going to go. They don't form, the wagons don't encircle her immediately.
No,
there's a kind of telling pause.
It was very telling.
Over her tax problems, which turned out to be a total nothing burger.
Yeah.
But the leadership was kind of supportive, but it was also, you could feel that, are we going to have to jettison her?
And then there was the fandango with Diane Abbott, of course, which you talked about in the last
which,
pod.
It couldn't really have been more badly handled. And I think is still not quite settled because there was a mysterious tweet which was immediately deleted.
Oh, I've missed this. What's this?
Well, it was Starmer said in his Observer interview with Tom Baldwin, his biographer, that something to the effect of, I respect Diane more than she probably suspects, right? And this was a headline. And this was treated from Diane Abbott's account with more Starmer lies.
No, really?
Yes. Now, the tweet was taken down. A lot of people took screenshots, so it's around. This leads me to suppose that quite often prominent and busy politicians have someone handling their social. Although I would have thought that at a time like this, you'd want to keep a pretty clear eye. Anyway, it came down. Nothing has eventuated so far from it.
Wow.
But it did make me think.
Wow.
Obviously, whoever wrote that, whether it was Diane Abbott or one of her team.
It's a fairly ballsy move. If you're one of the team, you would think that she would have approved it.
It obviously reflects. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't a unilateral decision.
Well, I mean, obviously, there are other factors in Starmer's row with Diane Abbott, but you're absolutely right about the seeming reluctance of because Rachel Reeves is not the female firebrand that you're looking for.
No, not at all.
Lisa Nandy, Jess Phillips, Angela Rayner, they've all got it in them.
They have
to go head to head with these people.
Yeah, I mean, you do need people who have pugilism in their veins, and not all of these people do. And Starmer and Reeves are happiest at Davos. They like being with other grand people talking about grand plans. And they will have to enact grand plans. They're going to be Prime Minister and Chancellor. I mean, I'm not saying that politics should be a mud pit, but a lot of it is, unfortunately.
And who's the John Prescott?
Well, I think Angela Rayner is the John Prescott. And again, I think Blair understood that much better than Starmer understands that about Angela Rayner.
Yes.
He would always say, it's just John being John whenever there was a problem. And that's right. He understood that Prescott was a really, really great asset to the party. And without Prescott, he wouldn't have been able to do a lot of things he did to reform the party.
Well, if you ask the question, which is often asked, about which of these candidates, which of these politicians would you sooner go for a beer with, then the answer is it's John Prescott, it's Angela Rayner.
Yeah, of course.
Not, and it's probably, God damn them, it's probably Nigel Farage for a lot of people. Well, it's almost certainly Nigel Farage for a lot of people.
Do you remember when Tom and Mark Steers Tom Baldwin and Mark Steers came in to talk about their book on England?
Yes.
And Tom, who is, a Labour through and through.
It was only 5 weeks. Do you think I've got a kind of early onset?
No, I was going to say what he said, right? Rather than,
yes, I remember.
Do you remember that?
I can remember that.
Do you remember that place that we go on a Thursday? No, that's not what I'm saying. And he said that Farage had charmed him.
Yeah.
And I mean, imagine, if you will. I mean, it's kind of an enticing prospect.
Do you know, I went head to head with him once on GMB. The clip's on YouTube. I thought I did all right, but I was constantly whispering in his ear, liar, 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 every time he said something. And Piers Morgan kept sort of shuffling me off a bit, but it was like a real test.
Yes,
But
he enjoys.
He likes the combat.
And he also, I mean, another thing about Farage that's underreported is he enjoys the company of journalists and politicians that disagree with him.
Yeah.
He's very gregarious.
Yeah.
And, he'll have friends on all papers. And he doesn't only hang out with people who are National Socialists.
Well, there's a
which is very generous of him.
Very interesting tweet that's only just popped up into relevance now, given what you've just said, which was Christopher Hope, the former Telegraph political editor, Chopper Hope, who, by the way, used to live opposite me when I was growing up. Yeah, and I had round, and I'd forgotten this, at the Formby Times, where I started my career, had him round for work experience, and he made his tea, so little realising that I was setting off a future GB News political editor.
Yeah.
How his career's gone downhill ever since the Formby Times. But anyway, Hope said, blah-de-da, and I'm trying to... Nigel Farage is not picking up his phone. Now, most politicians wouldn't pick up their phone to random inbounds from political editors, but
Yes.
you can bet your life Farage does every time.
Yes.
So it was notable that he wasn't today.
That's a really good point.
So it was worth remarking.
Yeah, it was worth remarking upon.
So that's another skill that the bastard's got,
Well, I think he's always on.
Yeah.
I think he's addicted to the limelight. I think he has that sort of amazing sort of reservoir of adrenaline that Trump has too.
Yeah.
He'll just keep going until
he's high energy, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think he's the kind of guy, and they exist, who will just keep going at 60 miles an hour until one day he'll stop and die. At a grand old age or whatever. I don't know. But I don't think he will quietly decline. He's the sort of person who cannot, and this is in a way the more one thinks about it. Although I don't think we knew precisely what was coming today, it makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it? Right. I mean, actually, for him to do what he's doing, given where the Tories are, given that Labour is going to win, this is the smart move.
Well, listen, one thing we can agree with him is that a very dull general election campaign
just
has
got
suddenly
very
sprung to life, hasn't it?
It really has.
All right.
Was, to use one of your metaphors, it was a hand grenade thrown into the pool, wasn't it?
It really was. And all the fish are floating belly up right now. Well, I hope you thought that was a worthwhile listen. We certainly enjoyed doing it, and we're going to do this at least until the general election, and maybe beyond, who knows. So let us know what you thought about it. Get your questions in, any feedback to 2matts@tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2, MATTS, @tnepublishing.com. Or if you listen on Spotify, you can message us there, and that's what Larry in Coventry did, who says, I've never heard of Alan Edwards before today. What a lovely sounding fella. Cheers, lads.
Well, he is.
He is a lovely... And if you haven't heard the Alan Edwards podcast, that's the last one before this one.
Yes.
And it's actually it's the one before, isn't it? Because
we got a Q&A.
And he's brilliant. And
he's great. So it's very, very, very much worth going back to.
It's all, if you want a little bit of time out from politics, go and have a listen to the Alan Edwards. It's pubtastic, folks. Do it all for charity. And we'll have more questions on our Sunday Q&A, and there'll be a brand new episode of the regular podcast on Friday. Can you cope with all this? If you've enjoyed this...
It's all go, isn't it?
It's all go.
Suddenly, it's all go.
It's all go. Tell a friend, tell a colleague, tell a loved one, and remember our subscription offer. If you think that you like the conversations on the Two Mats podcast, you will love the New European.
You'll go crazy. It's the best.
But more than that, we are part of the resistance. We are part of the fight back against...
Yeah, there's a real resistance. I mean, Nigel Farage thinks he's the resistance. Ha! I say.
We are the resistance now. We're the Mackie.
Le Mackie.
Head to the neweuropean.co.uk/2mats. That's the number 2, MATTS, and there's a link in the show notes.
Sign up and you get a free beret.
Thanks to our... What was that great... Secret Army. Do you remember that?
Yeah, Secret Army.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
It was. I mean, it was hello without the laughs, really, wasn't it?
It really was. Okay. Thanks to our producer, Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. And until Friday...
It's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.